Sick. Okay. Now we're
going.
Hi, Alex.
Joe. It's so good to see you.
So good to see you.
Yeah, I haven't seen you since you've been to Rome.
That's right. I've been in Rome.
Which is sick. Can you tell me a bit about your time in Rome? And
it was amazing. Pasta is delicious.
Yeah.
I ate a lot of it. No, it was really fun. It was such a strange time, like such a great thing to be able to do. So I was living there for 3 months, and I was working in the archive of Giacinto Scelsi, listening to the digitized recordings of his improv on his synthesizer from the 50s, and it's so strange. The tapes are so like gnarly and noisy and strange, and I learned a huge amount. So that was really nice.
Is that the thing called the Ondolina?
That's right, the Ondolina. But
Ondolina.
Wait, is that right? Ondioline.
I know, yeah.
Ondiola they call it in Italy, and then they call it Ondioline everywhere else. I think that's right.
Right. So everywhere else it's more like a violin, and in Italy it's more like a viola.
I hadn't thought of it that way, yeah. So yeah, it was really fun, and one of the first things I did there was write this piece. So this was all written in Rome. I had the idea quite a way beforehand, but there wasn't a single note down before I arrived in Italy.
Yeah. So would you say this piece is sort of like soaked in Chelsea's? I can't think of another word.
Weirdly not at all in his blood.
Right. Yeah.
No, I don't think it is actually. I was listening also to quite a lot of like Renaissance polyphony. Imitative.
Yeah, you mentioned Josquin.
Yeah, exactly. Palestrina, like that actually had more of an impact on this piece than Chelsea. I think partly that's because of Exaudi, right? Who I'm writing for, who have this like split focus on the older gnarly and the newer gnarly, and so I think I was slightly kind of drawing on that, and then I guess there's the word, the kind of early modern atmosphere of the Rabelais. Felt to me like polyphony was an important part of that. Although it's not all polyphonic, but yeah, that was.
Well, maybe now's a good time to just quickly explain the conceit of the piece, since you mentioned the Rabelais.
Yeah. So it's this amazing passage, which I should say I first heard about it on a podcast. So there's this amazing podcast that I've been following for maybe a decade, called The History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. And it is an astonishing resource. And they are up to episode like 500 or something insane.
Wow.
And that has got them about as far as the early 17th century. So, you know.
Wait, when did they start?
They started with the pre-Socratics.
Okay.
And so they have two streams. They have one stream which follows traditions that called it philosophy, which is essentially the tradition of Western Europe and the tradition of the Arabic-speaking world, both called this thing philosophy. And then they have another stream which has another bajillion episodes where they look at philosophy in traditions that didn't use that word. So Indian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Africana philosophy. So it's a very varied and interesting thing that I've been kind of learning from for years and years. And they had a great episode on Rabelais. Not somebody I think who is commonly thought of as a philosopher. And this is one of the things I really like about the podcast, is that they're very broad in who they consider philosophically. You know, it's like, does it have philosophical content? That's the question. And Rabelais is a writer is incredibly philosophical and incredibly weird. Have you read any? You seemed like you.
I've never read any Rebel 8.
It is. I would say it's one of the hardest things I've ever read. I can't make it through huge amounts. It's very, very, very strange. It needs huge amounts of annotation to get what he's going on about, because it's this complicated play on the theology and politics of the time he's living in.
Which is, when is he living in?
Well, let me get his actual dates rather than just...
Let's do this properly, Jeff.
Exactly.
Roll our sleeves up.
Died 1553.
1553. So that's
like...
That's around Bird? Is that around Bird?
Yeah, and
Bird's writing stuff in 1575 and stuff, right?
Yeah, so a little earlier. And he's I think, crucially, he is a kind of a Reformation writer. That's I think, like, he is, and he's thinking about that. He's very influenced by Erasmus. That's, I think, like, that's a crucial figure for him. And so it's got all this kind of, it's all very, what's the word? Complicated, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. It's all very complicated. And yet the actual narrative feels like a kind of strange, medieval illuminated manuscript. It's full of, this cast of giants and monsters meeting, strange characters and demons and going to the North Pole and going to an enchanted island full of whatevers. It's this very digressive and hallucinogenic set of stories. I think truly the strangest thing I've read. I can't think of anything. And
that sounds awesome.
And as I say, when I say I've read it, wait, let me get the book. It's fucking massive.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've absolutely not made much of a dent on it.
That's huge.
It's this.
That's thick.
Yeah.
3 C's, 5 C's.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed it. Actually, I like the front cover of this is nice. This is a Bruegel the Elder. And I think, like, if you think of the vibe of Bruegel the Elder, then you're getting, like, the right vibe for the book.
Okay. What's he holding? There's the guy holding something.
He's got, like,
is that one of the giants?
No, this is it's not a picture that depicts this story.
Okay.
But it's well chosen because the kind of the atmosphere is correct. Okay. So yeah, I have set this really cool passage in it where our heroes come across they're kind of far up north, and they're on a ship near the North Pole, and they start hearing all these noises, and the kind of there's one amongst them who's like a massive wuss, like terrified of everything, and and he kind of like starts going, "Oh no, we're being ambushed," and kind of running around and screaming.
Yeah, it really sounds like
frequently ambushed, are you, Alex?
Yeah. I'm constantly worried. Sorry to do okay, he's getting ambushed.
And the captain of the ship explains, no, what you're hearing is that last winter there was a battle, and the sounds from the battle went up into the sky and froze, and now that it's spring again, they're falling as hail and melting, and the sounds are emerging. And then in the next chapter, they start kind of picking up these hailstones off the deck, and as they melt in their hands, they start emitting the words that they contain. And it's very beautiful. It's very strange. It's also like kind of very silly. Like I've it's there's 2 full chapters of this, so I couldn't include most of it. Let me actually go to it now because it's.
Are there any bits that you could read that you've?
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
Well, I'll read some of the bits that I'm actually setting, but I'll also read some of the bits that I'm not because there's. I actually found it hard to choose. There's a lot of let me get actual chapter and verse here because it's fourth book, chapter 55. So yeah, here we go. I'll read a bit that where the captain of the ship explains what's going on. My lord, there is nothing to be afraid of. We are here at the approach of the frozen sea, over which there was a huge and cruel combat between the Arimaspians and the Nephilibates at the onset of the last winter. At that time, the words and cries of the men and the women, the pounding of the maces, the clank of the armour of men and horses, the whinnying of the steeds, and all the remaining din of battle froze in the air. And now that the rigour of winter has passed and fine, calm, temperate weather returned, they melt and can be heard. So that's the kind of the premise. But there are some that haven't yet melted, and they kind of throw them onto the deck. And that's the bit that I've set. Because having previously a lot of what you've heard are kind of battle sounds. And I did think about doing something on that basis. But in the end, I decided that it would end up in a different type of piece than I wanted to write. There are terrible wars going on at the moment, and I couldn't write. I tried, and I couldn't write about it really. It was too. I think in a way, the strangeness and almost lightheartedness of the metaphor got clashed too much with the reality of what's going on. So it was too jarring for me. So instead I focused in on this bit where it's colours that are emerging. Now, there is a link to the battle because actually the words they're using for the colours are the words from heraldry. So they're like the banners of an army rather than just plain colours. And I've slightly drawn on that in some of the ways that they're proclaimed. There's a kind of heraldic aspect to some of the sounds I'm using, fanfare-like. But mainly I'm focusing on the colours themselves and on this idea of sound and colour and touch and temperature, all of these different senses kind of mingling hallucinogenically. Which I just love.
It sounds like a very sensual book.
Yeah.
It's even though it's got all this complexity, it sounds deeply involved with physicality, and it just sounds. I mean, it's an amazingly imaginative conceits. Both, I mean, obviously for the book and I think for a piece as well.
Yeah, exactly, and it's. I thought it was a very, particularly with electronics, that's the thing, because the electronics, they manipulate words in this piece. They manipulate sung text, and so I thought that would be a way that I could try and capture, capture this strange idea of words emerging from a frozen ice.
Amazing. I mean, maybe we should talk a bit about the setup of your electronics, because that's what anyone who's listening, all these nerds might want to find out. That's what I want to know.
I mean, honestly, it's really simple. I try always when I'm working with electronics to keep them as simple as possible, because particularly with live electronics, it's a little different if I'm doing a fixed media piece, because then you can layer to your heart's content. But I think if you're using live electronics, I want the role that the electronics plays, the character of the electronics, to be like as clearly defined as the character of the instruments on stage, right? So, you know, if someone's singing, their voice has a timbre, it has a colour quality, they have a personality, and you're writing for that person. If you're writing for violin viola, that's the same. And I like that as a composer, as something to be working with, and I want that with electronics. The problem is that electronics doesn't give that to you. Electronics can sound like any sound in the world. And so to help myself, I try and really, really curtail how I'm working electronically. Particularly to be like very, very, very constrained in the character of the sounds. And so predictably enough, the character of the sounds here is kind of frozen, stuck, so I guess somewhat misty, occluded. Those are the types of sounds that I'm going for. It's a very simple set of things. There's a vocoder, which uses a recording that I took of melting ice as a carrier signal. Very simple. There's a pitch shifter. There's a resonator with some reverb. There is there's Ableton spectral resonator, which allows sounds to be frozen. That's the phrase they use, and it's very useful.
Right, for this piece especially.
Exactly. I mean, it's a little predictable. Perhaps that's fine. And then just
you've got to do the obvious thing.
No, this is it. This is it. I want it to sound like it's frozen. It's It's also, I think, partly my thinking here is it's a short piece, right? It's a 5-minute piece. Like you don't have time to. If you're writing a piece about frozen things in a 5-minute piece, I'm not sure that you have that much time to monkey around with counterintuitive visions of frozenness. Anyway, that's how I felt.
You got to get to it, otherwise people are going to go, "Oh, I got a piece, but I didn't. I'm not sure if that conceit really came across."
Exactly. Also, they're singing in early modern French. People have got enough in their way. Do you know what I mean? And then some delays. So really, really simple. Things are routed a little complicatedly sometimes. It's all just automated on Ableton. So, like in terms of my experience of playing it is spacebar. Like how many times? Like 12 times. So it's really more times than that, but 26 times. But it's really very simple electronics.
Do you do any warm-ups for when because you're an electronic artist?
Oh absolutely. You should see. No, I just game.
Finger press-ups.
I just go into my gaming cave. Like full reactive LED light strips, like one of those crazy chairs that looks like you're in a spaceship, all that stuff.
So on February 22nd, 1 o'clock, if you want to see Joe Bates in a LED light chair, just look up then. Okay, so I mean the other amazing, I just had a glance through the score, which has got me pumped. The other really exciting thing about this is the approach to microtonality, which you are a doctor in Joe Bates.
Yeah, so if your microphones get sick, then I can I can help them. That's me.
You put them in the intensive care.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. That's right. Okay. Broadly, if you had to sum up your approach to, because there are many approaches to microtonality, right? There's the Chelsea approach. There's you've talked to me about ring modulation before. There's the spectral approach. There's the
there's lots of different ways.
Approaches. You could explain it better than me.
So I think perhaps the place to start is that I am a big I love chords and tunes, like basically all my music is made out of like chords and tunes and beats. So I'm very interested in vertical harmonies. I'm very interested in counterpoint. And so my microtones are almost always conceived of with like harmony and tonality, like very as the guiding force. And so a large part of the way that I've worked over the last 5 years or so is by thinking really carefully about microtonal tonality, about like what it means to be in a place where the strange sounds of microtonality can become a home, can become a place where you can cadence to, where you can arrive on a microtonal chord and it feels right. And in that way to try and find within this like unfamiliar language logics of progression, of phraseology that feel like they come from within the music rather than are applied from outside. So in that sense, like it's quite connected to, I think, some quite traditional like classical models of harmonic logic, although used in ways that are quite divorced from those older forms.
I mean, this sort of tonality is it's a known object, it's a known system, and I mean I'm wondering, because the Rabelais is, it's not reality, it's fiction, but it's playing with the story is set in reality, but then there are these kind of metaphysical bendings of freezing shouts. No one freezes. That's not possible. You can't freeze a shout in or like battle cries and stuff in real life. But
so I'm very interested in otherness, in another word for otherness, alterity. I love that word. I think it's kind of nicer than otherness. Yeah. Alterity sounds kind of like to me it sounds like kind of misty and like more kind of sweet, whereas otherness I like as a word, but it has like quite a lot of associations already, like othering, and it has some quite negative associations, but also it's a kind of a rough word, right? It's quite like, anyway, so I quite like the word alterity as to what I'm interested in these sounds that slightly like rebuff your where comfort feels strange, where it feels like odd that you are comfortable. So like I want the music in some ways to have that sense of like there are moments of comfort, moments of perhaps more straightforward beauty, of resonance, but for it to feel strange that that's what's going on. And so I'm also interested when I work with words or with more specific metaphors, for them to have that same feeling of like rightness and strangeness. And the Rabelais definitely has that in spades.
Yeah. So there's you're seeking for the audience, for a listener. You would be happy if they had this sort of multi-layeredness of experience. This sounds like it shouldn't be right, but it somehow makes sense. But it's weird that I feel right.
Yeah.
You kind of have this sort of snake eating its own.
Exactly.
tail.
Yeah. And I definitely. Yeah, I do want. Yeah, I want to be moments that feel, like, that have that satisfaction, where the harmony feels satisfied and stable. That's kind of important structurally to me, actually. It's important for me to think about how a piece moves.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. So it has an effect on the global form as well.
Yeah, perhaps most of all, actually. Like, I think it's one of the reasons why. Yeah, I mean, like, and I do describe this essentially as being tonal music. It's just tonal music in weird keys, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything critical about this sort of microtonal rendering of tonality, or
critical in what sense?
Sorry, what was that?
Critical in what sense? Like.
I don't mean like, tonality is whack, like, that's not what I mean. I mean as in like, I guess what I mean is more like, okay, if you were looking at a watch, it's a very well made watch, but it's like for my purposes now, it would be better if the watch had a gun in it. I don't know, or like
okay, no, I understand what you said. So like a sense that the resources of tonality might no longer be sufficient, or no, not entirely. I think in a way, like, I don't feel up to a deft wielding of traditional tonal material that I do actually love. So basically, I love a lot of the sounds of traditional tonality, and I use them. There's major chords in this piece, there's minor chords in this piece, and I use my own chords as well. And I love the rhetoric of tonality. I love a lot of the way that it allows music to work. And I really admire composers who are able to use that material with a kind of a deft control over the things it's signifying and the things that it's bringing to its audience. So a composer like, just comes to mind because I'm trying to hack through his piano stuff at the moment, but is Will Marsey, right? So Will Marsey, love Will's music, and
shout out Will Marsey.
Exactly.
Put all my headshots. Thanks.
Yeah, and like he makes beautiful and surprising things with amazing amounts of control. That's how it feels to me anyway, over the like symbolic meaning of the resources that he's using. Same goes for lots of composers that I admire who use that type of material. And like genuinely, there's just part of me that's like, I'm not up to it. Like, that shit's hard, man. Yeah. I just gonna make up my new tonality, and then I can like shortcut semiotic deftness by monkeying around with microtones.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, with Will, there's like what results is this tremendous wit and personality that comes from the constraints that he works with.
Completely.
So he's a great person to mention. But yeah, I mean, sorry, I interrupted you.
No. But actually, that word wit is useful, right? Like, I'm not very funny musically. Like, I haven't told a musical joke in a long time, and.
Right, yeah. Oh, well, that's really hard. It's really hard to do that. I mean,
I feel like you can be funny. I feel.
I in person. What do you think in my music? I get quite like different responses. I mean, I don't want to talk about movies too long, but I get some people telling me, oh, your music is like really like you. Like some people are like, your music is just like your personality. Other people are like, I just wish more of your humor or like something would come through.
I think I find so there's something about your music that's quite escalatory, like it escalates itself. Yeah. It's there's something in it where it always feels to be finding a way to raise the stakes somehow.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah.
And there's something in that to me that speaks of humour. It's like like a Buster Keaton or a Chaplin film, where like things are getting forever more and more fucked, and you're like, this can't get any more messed up, and it does, and it's hilarious. And there's something of that in your music. I think.
I'm pretty chuffed with that. That's pretty cool. Thanks, man. Yeah, we'll take that. That's that. Yeah, I can throw the towel in.
But yeah, so I don't know. So this is, it's not that it's critical of tonality. It's more. It's like about how I'm able to use it. And I mean, obviously, like I listen to and love loads of rock and pop music that uses tonality in a just much more straightforward way than I do. And again, it manages that because of such deft control over symbolism and vibe and sound.
Symbolism, vibe, and sound. Those are the three words. That's the tagline. Yeah. Nice. Well, I mean, maybe I've thrown you a bit of a red herring with this critical thing. Maybe let's go back to like alterity, like I mean, because alterity and otherness and that link with microtones. I think, I mean, it feels like in the UK, in like we have this okay so a word that comes to mind is blur, like blur and haze and it's sort of like a dissociation, like a visual a visual analogy for an oral dissociation.
Yeah, completely.
Does that make sense?
No, completely makes sense. Yeah, and actually, okay, so this is this is an interesting thing to bring up, and I don't think that that's where my music sits entirely.
Okay.
Like, well, there's a bunch of connected things here. There's a phrase that Robin Haig uses, millennial nostalgia, right, to talk about a certain way of dealing with referentiality. And I think that there are quite a lot of composers around our kind of age who use microtones as a way in which to manage referentiality. So microtones become a form of quotation mark that can render material, just can demark material, can put it in a, can put it in quotation marks, and that can then be manipulated in all kinds of ways and used to mean all kinds of things. But I think the microtones act as kind of demarcative rather than as their own center, their own tonal center. And so that's why I don't think of my music as working in that way. Because for me, often the microtonal stuff isn't necessarily demarked in the music's flow. There are places where I want the chord to not, basically for it to perhaps feel strange or whatever, but for it to feel, again, as I said, natural or undemarked might be a way to look at that. So
the word that comes to mind to me is sincerity. I mean, there's not that Robin's stuff isn't. I think Robin would admit that irony is a big part of his work.
Exactly, non-ironized. I think he is perhaps better than non-ironized, perhaps just non-referential. It isn't. I'm not using microtones as a way to manage referenced material, or to distance myself from the material that I'm using. And so in that sense, I think it's closer in approach to people like the plain sound composers, who I think have more of that approach, but whose musical style is really very different from mine. So, yeah.
Would that be like Your Cry or?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm not.
People. Oh God, you've asked me this, and the names have all just flown from my head.
Yeah, no. People can Google this.
Yeah, but I can also Google it because I'm at a computer.
Oh yeah, okay.
These are some of my favourites. I don't know. Mark Sabat. There we go. Mark Sabat. Sheko Slav.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Yeah.
And I think most crucially for me, anyway, Catherine Lamb.
Catherine Lamb. Yeah.
So
for sure.
So I think those are. Yeah, in terms of their attitude towards microtonality, people who I perhaps end up slightly closer to, but I think that difference, that thing about microtones as reference, or as a way of managing reference, that's where I think that I view my music as using them a little differently from other composers around me whose work I really love, like say. Like Robin or Ollie Leith.
I think the sonic result is quite different as a result. I mean, because I think in Robin and Ollie's work there's a more, definitely in Robin's work there's a more obvious, and that's why it's so great. There's a more obvious okay, that's the triad, and then it's for you it always feel for me. I mean, I'm thinking about your piece Phasmid a bit. You sent me the score, and I think there's something about the vertical combinations of microtones that you're using, something like that. Because there's that appendix at the back which has, if you get this combination right, if you I don't know 5 and 7, and then 13, if you hit harmonics 5 and 7 just right, 13 is going to come out, and then
right. 12,
maths, and you should hear that vertically, and it makes this sort of like amazing metallic sound, metallic timbre that just for instance, I mean, I nicked a lot of that for my pieces of this concert, to be honest.
Oh, nice.
That's way of thinking. That just doesn't really come up in Ollie or Robin's work, and that's not a criticism of there, but it's a difference.
And as I said, like, part of this feels like, I don't know. Almost, I was going to say it feels like a crutch. I don't think actually that's entirely right. Like, not sure that's how I experience it. It feels like, well, where to start this digressive thought I'm having. I am wary of the fetishization of microtones. I'm particularly wary of approaches to microtonality that are more interested in working through ideas about microtones than they are about the particularly like kind of symbolic or about how that meaning connects with the world outside. And there's a lot of microtonal composers whose work I really admire, but I do get slightly tired of the way, particularly in which their music is received, which is it's about these numbers, it's about how clever the dancing numbers are. Look at these numbers dance. And when that is done badly, as it often is in the kind of the online world of like Zen harmonic fans, people who love spending a lot of time on Zen Harmonic Wiki, that shit blows, sucks, terrible. Like both bad music, but also just terrible vibes.
Okay.
Like if I'm gonna write bad music, I'm gonna write bad music like because it's like cringe or like expressing something awkwardly, not because I've just like spent the whole time in my head. Like that's not how I want to write bad music.
Yeah. So you wanna live in the real world. You don't wanna be a monastic theorizer.
No.
Yeah. Well, let's. This has been fascinating. I think let's tie it back to the gig. Let's just sell the F out of this gig.
Right.
Why should people come and see our gig on February 22nd, 1:00 in Wigmore Hall?
Because it is a set of composers whose work is like really different from one another's, but also has this strong connection in that I think. Well, we're people who like each other's work. Right? I love your music. I love Lynn's music. I love Cassie's music, and so I think it will be a really like varied, but also like coherent time in which you'll hear some pretty wild sounds.
Yeah. No, I'm just a huge fan of everyone. It's like, I think that's like quite freeing because I just going into this, I just feel like. I'm a huge fan of everyone involved in this project. I have like so much trust in their capabilities, and I think it's going to be sick. All right, peace.
Nice, Alex. Let's stop this recording.
Should we stop recording? Oh yeah.
Done.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was so fun.
Good. Are you happy?